In this video, I'm going to talk to you guys about firearms training and why it needs to change. And I'm just going to also cover how I would run things if I had a dojo. And who knows, I actually might. So I probably alluded to that already, but I believe that firearms training should be treated the same as martial arts. Now, I know that there is something out there called Hugatsu or whatever, but everything I've seen from there and from my recent understanding of it, it is very, very old, and they tried to fuse it too much with like Japanese like martial arts or whatever, to the point where it's as far as today's relevance, as far as being scalable and stuff, it's not really. However, I think that it did pioneer in a good idea, and the understanding that firearms training, firearms in and of itself, and the use of firearms is a martial skill. Even if it's used in sport, just like martial arts, it is still a martial skill, but it's been kind of turned into an art more than, you know, something that is meant to primarily cause damage or kill somebody. I believe that we should actually start training firearms more like a martial art rather than, you know, the way that we're doing it. Because the way we're doing it, it is the only thing out there that is a fine motor skill, especially a martial skill, that is being trained this way. Where you go like 8 hours a day, maybe several days at a time for 8 hours, and you're just like stacking on all this stuff, especially like new shooters. It's impossible for the brain to actually absorb all that information and actually have any kind of skill. And I know a lot of people that don't understand the brain or aren't really tracking their progress will say, well, I was performing good at the end of that day. You're not going to be performing at all the next day or the next day after that. And the more time that goes on, the less you're going to perform. It requires immersion. And like this is like any kind of physical skill that requires that kind of precision and dexterity and fine motor skills, because shooting is a fine motor skill. There's a lot of fine tuning that needs to be done and a lot of fine skills that need to be done in order to shoot accurately under stress. So you cannot learn all that in 8 hours and then call it good for the rest of your life or even for the whole month. That's not good enough. And here's the thing, that 8 hours, you're maybe absorbing like a total of like 30 minutes of it. Because when it comes to physical skills, we have something that I will call an override. An information override. So what it'll do is it'll overwrite the information that you had already learned. So you start out with a safety brief, right? Well, that's declarative. That's declarative memory. And then the first thing you do is you learn, starting from the ready. And then you move on to draw, then reloads, malfunctions. By the time you're at malfunctions, you don't even remember the fine points of the presentation from the ready. Or for that matter, the draw. I mean, hell, you probably are going to have problems with reloads because even though it's still a little fresh in your mind, you've overwritten a lot of that by trying to focus on this task at hand. And not to mention that those 8-hour courses, it's all on the flat range where you're firing live ammunition, especially if you're new. There's a lot of ego that goes into it. Even if you don't know anything, you're still kind of competing with other people, and it can be very stressful. You don't want to look like an ass, and you don't want to be a safety violator. So with all that stress added, how much learning are you actually getting? I would tell you none. You're not learning anything. You're getting exposed to it. But without a primer and without a constant flow of exposure, your performance is going to be crap. And that's what ends up happening. By the end of the day, they're able to get a modicum of accuracy and proficiency, but is that actually going to be can that be replicated in the future? No. So what do we do about this? Well, I like to, what if they did more like what I do for my Krav Maga classes, but a little bit different? See, I meet 3 times a week. If you were going to be doing firearms training, I would say meet Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at, kind of like an inside dojo, where you have only like flute guns, you have airsoft firearms, and then you have deactivated firearms like clipped firing pins and, filled barrels, where the barrels are, welded closed with, lead or whatever. You would have those for training. And so it's completely safe to the public and stuff like that. Well, I think that would be the best setup. You can do pretty much everything you need to do with that kind of equipment. And you can do it safely, And you can develop a high level of competency, even mastery, with that kind of setup. So that's just my take on it. Now let's go ahead and look at schedules. Now a lot of people are like, well, I'm getting like 8 hours of training a month. What are you going to get? Well, okay, so your brain's only going to absorb maybe like 30 minutes of all that, because after about a half hour of physical skill work, probably 20 minutes is actually the average, according to neuroscience. 20 minutes and concentration on a development of physical skill that we've never worked on before, that's a point of exhaustion, where you start going downhill. You're at your peak. So, anyways, so after that 8 hours, you're fried. You're fried. You've got too much information overload, and plus a lot of things were overridden. Even if you were writing things down and videoing them, it's still a lot of information overload. You're not going to remember all that. You're going to need those notes in order just to be able to recall what the heck you did. It's just going to be too much. However, if you meet for an hour a day and it's a pretty relaxed environment and you have plenty of bullshitting in between, kind of like some martial arts classes or whatever, I'm not saying you're wasting time, but it's a very relaxed environment. And you're working on things, chunking a little bits at a time for an hour a day, 3 times a week, with 24 hours in between. That's actually one of the most optimum learning environments that you can have. So the total time that you're going to be training is maybe like 40 minutes. So you have your warm-ups, you have your physical warm-ups, your mental warm-ups, and stuff like that. And then you learn those physical skills, and you do it at a slow pace that you can learn. You start with the cognitive stuff, and then as time goes on, you start getting into the associative phases, and then the autonomic phase. And by that point, you should be ready to qualify for whatever level you're on. So let's think about this in training for a month. So I already said, like, for once a month, you go for an 8-hour course. Well, the amount of stuff that you're taking out of that 8-hour course is pretty slim, because it just overwhelms the brain, even if you take notes. And I swear I have something crawling on me. So, anyways, if you were to go 1 hour a day for 3 days a week, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, and say there's 4 weeks and change in a month, we'll just call it 4, you're getting 12 hours of training. And this is training that is more likely to be absorbed into the system, meaning that you're going to have a higher level of competency than if you were to have an 8-hour course where it was just on the stuff that you learned in that 1 month. So say for a month you were working on level 1, which I would term as being like, stance, grip, positions, and so grip, sights, trigger control, and stance and positions. So you're learning all the stuff that it takes to basically get those rounds to go down range. The last thing you're going to be doing is having some kind of stance, some kind of position, and you're going to be gripping, using your sights, hopefully, and pulling the trigger without moving the gun. If you were to spend an 8-hour course just working on all that stuff, how much of all that stuff is going to be fine-tuned by the end of it? Probably not. And it's going to be on you to train afterwards. So you're not going to really have guidance. You're not going to be able to have questions answered. You're not going to be able to have checks and balances throughout that. And not only that, you're getting 12 hours of periods of instruction and coaching constantly in a manner that your brain can absorb this physical skill. And it's 1.5 times the amount of time that you're going to get in an 8-hour course anyways. And guess what? For a month, let's say it's $150 a month to go to these courses. Flat rate, $150 a month, there you go. Well, and then, of course, money on top of that for qualifying. But if you were to go to an 8-hour course, how much are you paying? $200, $300, $400? Depending on who you're training with. It's entertainment. It's not actually training. It's not learning anything. But if you were to go to a monthly course where you just showed up for, that amount of time, then you would get a lot more out of it. I guarantee you. Your brain would be able to absorb a lot of that. And that's just my idea on that. And there would be other levels, like level 2 would be, doing presentations from the ready. And you start out with the last thing that you're going to do in order to pull the trigger without moving the gun. You're going to be in some kind of stance or position, whatever. And then, from there, presentations from the ready for level 2, the different types of readies that there are. Then the draw. And the draw from outside the waistband, inside the waistband, retention and just friction retention, like level 1, level 2, etc. Even level 3. Those would be absolutely valuable. And yes, level 2 would be difficult, but, as far as like getting good at all that, it's going to take time. But when it comes time to qualify, you'd have something that's reasonable, but you'd actually have standards. Like I would say, drawing from a level 3 outside the waistband holster should only take like a second and a half. Like pretty much everything should be a second and a half, like within. Even drawing from concealment. Inside the waistband from concealment should take only a second and a half. And you meet on the range, it takes like a half hour to run through that course of fire, and there you go, you're done. And here's the reason why that would be kind of scalable. Because whether you're going into a sport or not, you're going to be working from the ready. You're going to be working from the holster. You're going to have to work with positions, and you're going to have to pull the trigger without moving the gun. And the practice that you do is not really much different than what you do for dry fire, but you're actually getting coached the entire time. You're getting coached the entire time. You're being led and guided. It's not self-taught. Because realistically, everything that we're doing right now, everything that I've done is self-taught. In the military, you're not being self-taught, but you're being babysat. And it is kind of self-taught because they just tell you how to do the reps or whatever. And the amount of training that you get for firearms in the military is pretty low. As far as like the amount of hours of good training that you're getting is pretty low. It's just exposure to scenarios and adapting your use of the weapon with that, which can work, but it doesn't work as effectively as, getting micro training in that. And that's where a lot of those high up units actually have learned that to use neuroscience to their advantage. So their training is not really as intense as one might think. They get a lot of rounds downrange because they can, but as far as their, overloading their brains with all this information, that's just not really necessary, is it? So anyways, with all that said, that's my idea. I think we should be training firearms, the way we train martial arts, because it is a martial skill. It is a martial skill, more of a martial skill than a martial art. It's more of a martial skill than Taekwondo. It is more like Krav Maga, where it is the use of violence to stop violence. Or in a sports setting, even in a sports setting, it's all based on time. You need to be able to do things quickly and with precision. And so the only difference is the cues that we work off of. In sport, it's more audible to say, start shooting. And in the real world or on the street or for the profession, it's more visual. It's like, okay, I see something that deserves bullets. To kind of put it in a, non-politically correct way. But anyways, I hope this video was interesting for you. Go ahead and let me know what you think about this in the comments below, and you guys have a good one.